Old School versus New School, How Social Media Journalism is Changing Audience Relationships with Traditional Media, presented by Mayel Stith for JCM-533. Traditional journalism has set a precedent for how news is to be shaped, broadcasted, and distributed. Traditional journalism encompasses television, radio, and print news. Legacy media has a specific tone of voice and cadence that has evolved into something that is digestible for consumers on different platforms. In recent years, consumers have turned their attention to social media rather than solely focusing on messages from traditional journalism. Legacy journalism has taken biased and partisan views that don't sit well with all consumers. So, in order for people to feel represented by the news, they turn to social media. Social media is a fast-paced landscape that instantly allows consumers to add their voices to a story and even add critiques to a story. So this helps boost the participation and the interest in social media journalism. Technology is constantly changing the ways that we gather and distribute news, but an aspect of technological advancements that the public did not foresee was the ways that social media or technology could even change the relationships that we have with traditional journalism. So this brings up a question. How has social media changed consumer behavior in relation to traditional journalism? On the right side of the screen, I have a few points and reasons as to why this study is important and what I will be studying. So I will be studying the audience and the receiver and why and how social media is becoming the go-to source for consumers and dissecting the changing relationships between consumers and traditional journalism. The second point is this topic is important because social media platforms aren't fully vetted outlets. Social media platforms can serve as a breeding ground for misinformation, and few regulations exist to amplify facts. And the third point is consumers are leaning more towards social media, which means the public is consuming more misinformation than vetted facts. Media choice, incidental news exposure, and selective exposure play a role in the growth of social media news. A piece of background, I took an interest in this topic after Module 4. The module discussed social media use as it pertains to the news and the different ways social media is used as a tool for news. Social media aids in the distribution, production, and consumption of news. I began to think about how social media is changing the relationship between traditional journalism and consumers. Traditional journalism has gained a disdain with audiences, which has impacted consumers' trust in traditional media. Social media allows consumers to act as reporters to document, distribute, and critique stories in real time. Social media has found itself in important conversations about news consumption, spreading misinformation, and the changing relationship consumers have with traditional forms of journalism. For news publishers, it is a vital way to reach audiences they cannot attract with their traditional offerings, as young people's general media usage continues to shift to social media platforms. And this quote comes from a source that I reviewed in my research. In my literature review, I analyzed previous research about consumer behavior, social media's impact on traditional journalism, and the influence celebrities have on social media. I learned from this analysis that most people thought that social media would be a fad, but it became an integral part of how we consume news. With theories like selective exposure, incidental news exposure, and the cultivation theory, I was able to find works of literature that explore social media's impact on traditional journalism. A few pieces of literature that I reviewed include the internet, mobile phones, and blogging. How new media are transforming traditional journalism, and then this was followed by social media journalism and its impact on social change, the case of Twitter. With this knowledge that I gained from my analysis, I formed my hypothesis and my research questions. If consumers are empowered by selective exposure and the incidental news exposure to gain their news through social media, then the relationship consumers have with traditional journalism will change because consumers will find more sources online that align with their beliefs. Here I have my hypothesis that I just read, but I just have it typed out for you all to take a moment to read it for yourselves. So for my research project, I have 3 research questions. The first one is, how has social media changed consumer behavior in relation to traditional journalism? The second one is, how has incidental news exposure aided in the impact social media has on consumers? And the third one is, how has user-generated content given way for consumers to stray further from traditional journalism? Here are my research questions. Again, I just have this here for you all to read it for yourselves. So as I mentioned earlier, a part of the freedom that consumers feel when it comes to social media journalism is the fact that they can add details to a story in real time. They can critique things in real time, and they can make themselves feel represented by stories that they tell because it's coming from their mouth, because they are able to document things. But I decided to add this influence that celebrities have on social media and social media news, because there are a lot of celebrities that do use their platforms for positive things or to talk about politics, especially when it comes to elections. So the next portion of this paper will be talking about the celebrity influence, and I used Cardi B and Beyonce for examples. So briefly, the celebrity influence plays a role in people flocking to and staying committed to gaining news information from social media. Cardi B in particular has used her platform as a celebrity to speak out against racism and has employed her followers to educate themselves about politics. Cardi B has hosted numerous Instagram lives where she has educated viewers about world issues and politics that pertain to the United States. In 2016, Cardi B used her platform as an entertainer to appeal to younger audiences, and she interviewed Bernie Sanders so that younger audiences understood what was on the line at that time during the presidential election. On average, Beyonce accumulates over 1 million likes per photo, which gives notice to followers on what she's posting and what their interests are based on her content. This gives insight into how one mere message from a celebrity can spark union, change, and extend the longevity of a message. Beyonce has used her music and her music videos to draw attention to political issues. In 2016 and in 2024, Beyonce endorsed Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. Beyonce's endorsements of these two candidates boosted participation in the presidential elections and the overall knowledge of issues that were at stake. The methods for this research will be quantitative and qualitative. This research will be survey and research based. The sample size will be 200 people made up of different genders, sexualities, and races. The participants' age will range from 18 to 65. The survey will include 50 questions that range from the collective's trust in traditional media to what social media platforms they frequent to the growing dependency on social media for news. The results of the survey will be used to create pie charts and bar graphs showing which races and age groups are depending on social media for news versus which groups are sticking with legacy media. For results in terms of age, I expect a large percentage of social media dependency for news to come from the ages 18 to 29. According to Forbes, for Generation Z, 46% primarily turn to social media for their informational needs, putting their preference for the platforms where they already spend much of their time. So in conclusion, my research shows that there is a growing dependency for social media journalism as consumers align with social media news due to selective exposure, but traditional journalism still wears the crown. Future research should take regulations of social media platforms that it studies into account and different algorithms for social media platforms and how algorithms can stifle certain news, which could potentially turn audiences back to traditional forms of news consumption.